have been working together previously with non-fungible architects, and now I was able to experience your amazing new work with Digital Art Zurich last week at Wasserkirche. How would you describe your work that you had in Wasserkirche last week?
We were invited by the Digital Art Festival to do an immersive installation in this place. It's a quite amazing location. It's a place of worship for more than 1,000 years, and the church that we have as of today, it's used as a cultural place. There is exhibitions. There's also religious rituals happening in there. And for the Digital Art Festival, we were able to install a site-specific works, and we used mixed reality as the medium to connect with the audience. Mixed reality means you're wearing a headset that enables you to see both your surrounding but also augmented digital content. Me and my partner, Arne Margold, we worked together since quite a long time on questions around spatial computing. And we came up with a setup where you could go through the church and experience digital layers of information, of questions, of places to visit. It was really like a journey. And because it was asked from the festival to do something in relation to spirituality, we really try to implement a layer of reflection, introspection, and somehow out of space experiences into the works that would activate and stimulate visitors' connection to themselves or to their spiritual beliefs, independent from religion or anything. It was running for 10 days in this church, and I don't know the final number of visitors, but it was really successful in the sense of giving a lot of people the opportunity to go and see and stay inside the works for up to half an hour. Even some guests stayed even longer than that. Yeah, it was quite amazing also for us how well it worked. It was an experiment in the sense that can we utilize these highly technology based devices to get you in that mode. It wasn't so clear to us whether that would work at all.
You remember when I first had my VR goggles on, that was with you in
Yeah.
your atelier. And my first and spontaneous thought was probably an LSD trip is more or less that. Never experienced. Maybe I should. And when I got into the Wasserkirche, just for our audience to get a bit of an idea as someone who just experiences as a visitor, it's a completely empty church. You have a panel where it says Digital Art Zurich, and then you have these people walking around with these VR glasses and with a headset, and they were just in their world. And you would join them. Previously, of course, you and your team explained what would happen. You had to sit down, you had to adjust, you had to get into the mode. And then you walked through this Wasserkirche, you saw everyone else around, and then you entered into these bubbles where you had amazing experience. We'll talk about the bubbles a bit later. But the fact that most probably many of your visitors have never had any VR Googles on their head before. You were there and you were so interested in seeing what was happening with the audience. What was your experience?
For most of the audience, it was the first encounter with at least mixed reality. Virtual reality, I guess some of them had been wearing a headset before in some ways, but the new devices that allow for pass-through, for the fact that you see your surrounding, and for a mix into virtual reality, we built an interface where from the church, from seeing the church through the headset, from seeing other visitors, you would enter these floating spatial objects or bubbles, like you said, by just sticking your head inside. And this would just put you into VR mode. And by being able to adjust the time in VR just by going inside those objects and out as you like, visitors were really on their own to do the journey as they liked it, to go back to a place, to go only for a short while, staying forever. And this gave a quite powerful opportunity to the visitors to find their own rhythm, to really observe the spaces as they would want to. And some of the spaces were like really immersive in the sense that we played with movement of abstract forms, with scans of the church that would like rotate around you. So there was a certain part of disorientation and like instability being inside those places that we wanted to provoke to a certain degree, and some other places that were just really like a very feel good zone, let's say, like a safe space or something. So this contrast and the fact that you could decide on your own where to spend how much time in what rhythm, yeah, made it possible for everyone to find their own path and their own way of, yeah, staying in the different locations as they like.
Age-wise, what was the audience? Who visited most? Did you have a certain age group that you noted being more interested, or
It was really spanning through all ages. So we had like the official minimum age was 12, and that's more related to the fact that we had some questions in the works that were not so easy to understand, because they were like, yeah, about spirituality, about in a more philosophical way. The questions were asked to trigger you, to really contemplate for introspection, and the wording didn't really, allow younger audiences to use it well. But it also is our experience that, for younger generations, it's very hard not to get super excited when you're in VR, when you're like, whoa, stuff flies around you, and they just go crazy. They laugh, they run to their friends or family members and show, look at this. So it changes the atmosphere of the place when kids, run around, and we wanted the experience to be really mindful and slow, and give everyone the opportunity to, if they wanted to use it really for real introspection or reflection. And therefore we decided it wasn't so easy to do it with kids, but we had some younger children coming, and they also were super amazed, obviously, mainly about the visual effects we used. And to my surprise, I guess, it was extremely well perceived also from very old visitors. My experience working with VR is that the older people are, the less they're interested in giving up control by putting on a piece of plastic on their face. And also the stimulation they get is often too much or too digital. I don't know exactly what makes them be less interested. But in this case, we didn't have anyone that in that sense didn't like it or wasn't able to go on this journey. And that was really nice for us to experience, that even, people in quite an old age would be able to get into this atmospheric journey that we hoped would be able to enter. And I think even let's say the record of the longest stay inside the experience was someone very old, where I wasn't sure how well he would perceive the works. And he would just not come out anymore. Like, I mean, he came out eventually, but he was in there for more than an hour, I think.
that's
And that
amazing?
and he was so thankful afterwards. So yeah, encounters like this was yeah, quite a touching result that we didn't really expect in to that extent to happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. I always thought I was the oldest ever trying your VR goggles. Definitely not a digital native. And personally how much I had to overcome to just give myself enough confidence. However, I did, and I appreciate it massively. We discussed right after my visit, we had a very interesting discussion on the work in itself, because I noted that you created sort of two types of rooms. One is where there is no orientation because it's more atmospherical. I would call these the LSD rooms, where you just experience colors, movement as well, form, shape, and lots of emotions. You're very directed to emotions. You hardly feel any fear, although there is no ground and no ceiling. Everything is endless. And then you had the other rooms where you were in an amended form of the church,
Mhm.
floating through space. Obviously you're standing still, but the room moves and you have that sensation that you're floating through space. And you remember, I was accompanied by a colleague of mine, and he just grabbed my hand because he saw in my face, and he only saw the under part of my face. And I was really scared, and I was so grateful for that, because I lost orientation. And I think this is something funny to understand. You lose orientation if you have objects that make you recognize where you are. You have a ceiling, you have walls, you have that similarity to the church. And then you get that idea of, I'm flying because I'm
Mhm.
high above the ground. You do
Mhm.
not even see a ground, but it's just something that your brain does with your perception. Was that an idea that you had in the beginning to do these two sorts of rooms, and what is the outcome?
Well, to play with the different typologies that you described, we call them the abstract spaces where, yeah, it's not so clear what kind of place you're at. There is a certain boundary, so we usually don't work with infinite spaces as you have more like a sense of being lost. So we usually make a alive, vibrating, moving surrounding that you see, okay, there is an end to my space. And this gives, from our experience, a better overall feeling because, yeah, it's already quite immersive and intense. And and to give this kind of boundary helps to feel more protected. And then we wanted to use the church as a place of worship and its history in an, let's say, abstracted way, but to be also connecting to the actual location where you're at. So we were scanning the church. We did a 3D scan of the interior, but we then distorted it to some degree. So it wasn't like a really high res copy, like a digital twin of the church, but more like a strangely manipulated version that we wanted to use to kind of get you in a mode of, recalibrating like where you are and what space is and what a church is. So there was many initial ideas that we had to use questions of place, maybe even more than space, in this work, and to use this scan and to shift you inside of it, to put it upside down, to scale it to different proportions. It made a quite powerful moment of unclarity of where it is you actually are at and what is real and what is unreal. And it, especially the kind of floating version that we did where you feel like you're just flying through the church, you have to be quite careful because the instability that you described happened to quite some visitors. So we're trying to adjust the speed of that to one that would just be acceptable but challenging at the same time. And by floating through the space, several visitors describe some reflections around death, around, and in between the earthly and the divine, or however they put it in words. But it really got them into a mode of, okay, am I dead, but is this how death might feel? And this was, I never have like had thought about these kind of emotions coming from that, let's say, manipulation or animation. But I guess it was the overall intensity of getting into this mood, reflecting about yourself, and then being in such, overstimulation almost of like being, transported through space in an impossible way.
How do you call these rooms? Because you said the others were abstract spaces, I noted, and to me they were like lucid dreams.
Well, we distinguish between schemorphism and non-schemorphism. Schemorphism is when you really take physical experiences that we have in our memory and you replicate them in the digital. So you make something look like it was stone or a tree, and then you put it in VR or in MR or whatever, even on a mobile phone, that you kind of you recall the use from your physical experiences and you then know what that is or how to use it, etc. And non-schemorphism tries to go away from that as far as possible, meaning you're trying to test what we do is testing how far we can depart of references that we have and still feel good, like, and still be, grounded or have a positive or stimulating or relaxed atmospheric quality in our works. And that is like a gradual shift, and it's also quite subjective. But like in relation to the manipulated church, let's say, this was something in between the abstraction of the space that were really not schemorphic and the digital twin typology of just looking alike, because you could see it's not the church through its manipulation, but it was still the dimensions and the surface and the texturing of it. So it had like a, a kind of strange overlay of both. And yeah, it was a new way of using space that we hadn't really worked with much in the past.
If we stay for another minute just with these schemorphic
Yeah,
spaces, I mean, the crazy thing, I would call them lucid dream
yeah.
spaces because you really recognize the church, but it was like just drawn apart. It's just like a bad movie,
All
or
in it, and there was stuff coming through it. Yeah,
exactly. Plus, you are moving, although you're stable on the ground.
yeah.
This was the most interesting part. What can your vision do to your body and your senses? I
Mhm.
mean, this has been hugely explored in science, but when you feel it yourself and you experience it yourself, you get a very different approach to this. I think this is what makes it a spiritual experience.
Mhm.
Anything we expect from spirituality is that you do have something else inside of you, somewhere around you, that is not related or not strictly related to your body, or that is a combination to your body, a spirit. And through this experience, what we presume is our spirit made us cheat our body.
Mhm.
So we felt we're flying, although we're definitely stable on the ground. Our brain is able to tell us, come on, you're standing, you're wearing a VR Google. Well, I forgot how to get out of the space, but I could have known, step back and you're out of the space. I even forgot that I could take off my glasses. I just felt like I'm in there now, manage to survive, although you're floating.
Yeah.
And that I think is the crazy thing, that you can sense physically yourself, that there is two different things, your physicality and whatever it is that is spiritual. What is your opinion or your experience on that?
I mean, what you're describing is really more the general effect of virtual reality and its powers, and why it's so, amazing to work with this medium. It's the fact that through our eyes and ears to some degree, but mainly in this case, our eyes, we're perceiving a reality that is virtual. That's why it's called that way. But our emotional reactions are taking it for granted to some degree, and that's why this roller coaster ride or this plank on a high rise building, experiences work so well, because you're just really scared. Or games that have encounters with other individuals, etc., in the gameplay that are really like, oh my god. So that's the fantastic use of that technology, I guess. It goes beyond what you experience in a movie where you're looking at a screen. It's much more immersive by being around you and you being much more in control of what to do, where to go, etc. So the interesting layer that we added to this, I guess, is the spiritual part, meaning that via the whole experience of going into an actual church, going in there, seeing like 15 people super quietly, extremely slow moving with these things on their head, like everyone entering that experience, like that exhibition was like, slowing, like stop talking, just like, what is going on? And that, you know, the intro that we had, it would get dark, you see a candle, there is an intro text, like everything was designed to really give you the opportunity to have real introspection. And for those who came along that offer, I think it really did something. And then the experience with the shifting space that you described, it was just on top of that. So you were already in that whole mindset of, what is life? Who am I? Where am I going? How do I feel? Like all of this had been triggered to some degree via your journey before. And then you go into that, like, oh my God, I'm flying mode. And I guess that was part of the power that especially this particular experience had to many visitors, because they were in that mindset at that moment. If you would just put them in there from scratch, it would have been totally, totally different. It would just be a fun effect.
What you experience there really gives you a sensation of what your mind can do, far beyond the regular possibilities. And what we discussed when we were there as well was, you are very experienced in this VR space. You spend hours per week in a VR space. So the effect entering into that lucid church to you is probably hardly anything anymore, because you know what is happening. Your brain has already told you the true story. You learned, or you have a different vision on what you're experiencing. Someone who's entering this the first time will just feel not sick, but will feel like shaky
I
on
think I
shaky ground.
disagree, Anna. I think I disagree.
Tell
What
me.
you're describing is someone who works in cinema doing movies as a professional and then going to see a movie from someone else. Why should he or she not be super immersed and excited about the other movie? So, of course, it's different if I go into my own works, because there, yes, I see everything and the compression of the texture and I don't know. But to go into such installation that I don't know what it is and I don't know what's happening, I'll be as captured and amazed and touched as anyone else, despite the fact that I know it's just a headset. If it's done well and if the stimulation is, if I react to it as with my senses, then I'll be as happy or sad or whatever the point is, like in a movie. So I would say it's not so much a question of being to use these devices on a regular basis, but more on the quality of the works. How much, and that's narration, right? It's the same with a movie, with a book, with anything. Does it really catch your attention? Do you really fall into the narrative and want to let go? And if you do, then anything can happen. So it's really, I think that's the question. It's a question of quality. And what's interesting in VR particularly is that so far, most experiences, at least what I've seen in festivals and what's available, really tries to get you engaged through like hyperrealism. So trying to really give you this feeling of, oh, I'm in that place. And because it doesn't look perfect, because you're not looking at the thing, but through a display at a simulation of it, there is always this constant error and kind of like, ooh. So this uncanniness that we have with avatar faces, to some degree we also have it with our surrounding, not feeling super convinced. So it's only the very intense moments where like, oh, that this might be, shut off, but it's not from my experience a good quality experience in many cases that I've seen. And the abstraction that we are using, and some other artists or movie makers that work with this medium, the abstraction that doesn't try to trick you but try to just get you really lost in the newness of what you're seeing, I find much more powerful and much more interesting to work with anyhow, because it takes certain things that you might take for granted into a new. You just don't know certain things, and that is super exciting and very stimulating. So I guess when we talk about quality of that medium, a lot will depend on the creativity of the people doing works for these headsets, to really get you enjoy the fact that you don't have this feeling of something wrong, something not real, but to really, enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
Enjoy it for not being a real tree or an apartment interior, but for, the story that is happening and the encounters that you have.
This is another learning for me today out of our discussion, because I just realized through that question, my understanding was, or my perception was, the longer I stay in VR, the more I will understand how it works, and you'll get used to it and then just take it easy and not be scared anymore. But you're telling me right the opposite with your analogy to the filmmaker, which really made me understand. It's not about being the control freak, which I usually am, taking care of, oh, I know where I am and what I'm doing, but it's letting loose and being able and willing to dive into an experience without mastering it.
Mhm.
And that, I think, to understand that is already a big step, because my perception was like, okay, we do a lot of VR and then our brains grow in understanding this, and we will have more capacity in our regular lives, on visuals or whatever. We have like an extra experience, but always taken back to this root where we pretend living in. But if you say, no, it's wonderful to perceive you're sitting in a cave and watching a game and you believe you're in that game and just relax and take it, then you really get the maximum out of this VR experience. Is that what you're saying?
Well, you're describing a relaxed state of mind, but it can be extremely the opposite. No, you can be extremely challenged and in a crazy, gameplay or something, or horror, or whatever people want to experience.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is that many current experiences take the aspect of surrounding space, whether it's architecture or nature, just too literal. And in VR, the problem is that navigation through it doesn't work as it does in the physical world, unless you have a massive space and you're physically walking through the works. But the moment you have to teleport or shift inside the space that you think has a certain dimension, has walls, has doors, it doesn't feel good. It's not a good experience. I mean, it works to some degree, but that is not what native VR can do. It's so much more powerful. And to get there, it takes time to really understand those mechanisms for creatives working with the medium, for visitors to, accept new archetypes of presence inside the medium, and to learn what is good and what is really, valuable at the end. And for me, how one of the main drivers for me why I enjoy working with this medium is the relevance for a user. And a lot of this relevance depends on the quality it has to connect to other people, to connect to yourself. And the medium so far is not explored much how we can really utilize it to have an encounter with another person as good or even better as it would be, seeing each other in the physical world. And the potential there I find absolutely endless to explore, because if you are really having a meaningful, deep, connecting experience with another human being through that medium that could not have happened otherwise, then we're talking, and that I think is really something to look forward when this is happening. And yeah, for my part, I'm very much concerned in where that's happening. So I'm really investing my time in the questions around place, around space, around atmospheric surroundings. But yeah, in the core is really why you're putting this piece of plastic in your face in the first place. Like, what's the point of using VR? And if it's just a cheap trick and like a ha ha ha, I'm getting sick ride, then it will be another, it's like a sugar. It's just gone after a second. And to go beyond that, I think that will be super, super interesting.
This is beyond space and beyond place. This is
Exactly.
this is your company. Yes, yes. I mean, I understand. I I start to understand
Yeah.
what you're saying. And honestly, we've been discussing for more than a year now, on and off, and it's really something you need to experience on yourself, and you need to discuss.
Yeah.
It has these levels, and
Yeah.
again, I mean, my understanding now is already different to before we had this interview, and this is the amazing thing. We're really approaching human being, possibilities of interaction, possibilities of social encounters, and of connecting, as you described so wonderfully, on a different level without any further necessities, even maybe without language, might be
Possible. Yeah.
enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and without physicalities. I mean, that's will VR take over spirituality
No.
or abuse of
There is
drugs?
not, it's not a fight, or it's not that. I guess we had a glimpse with this installation what might be possible, and that if installed in the right way with these devices, we can actually get a meaningful depth of introspection and spirituality uh, to be happening. But it's completely about yourself. I mean, going through a forest, sitting in a special place, whether that's on a mountain or I don't know. Like, there is so many possible triggers within nature, within built environments of humans that have tremendous powers to give you the opportunity to have a meaningful moment, whether it's with yourself or with others. But you have to do it. It's more on you. Are you willing and able to use that moment in a meaningful way? And the technology can only do so much. to help you with that. It still is you that needs to actually go and take the time and take the your sensibility to do it. But I see great potential in the fact that we are very attracted by using technology and using new stuff, like wanting to experience something we haven't experienced before. This curiosity and taking risks is in our nature, and to then utilize those devices to do something with quality rather than giving you a cheap trick. That's, I think, what will get more people be interested in those works and in those worlds. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see where that goes.